If you are anything like me, maybe in the last few months, Amazon has become a vulnerability for you. We've experienced many boxes showing up to our house in recent months. Part of that's because we're trying to do as little shopping publicly as possible, but part of that is also when you have more time at home and with a device, sometimes Amazon gets the best of us. Am I right? Now, I like to read. I like to get new books. I'm probably about 20 books deep into a wishful reading list. If I'm honest, it's much more than that. But there's a stack at home of books that I really want to read, and I'm struggling to get to them all. But one of the things that Amazon has really done well, maybe you've fallen victim to this as well, is I will maybe purchase a book on Audible or for print, and when I get to the checkout area, guess what pops along the bottom? Suggested books. It runs its algorithm. It says, Matt, we see you liking this book. Maybe you would like these 100 other options that are very similar to the one you just bought. And so I, like any good Westerner, tend to click on a few of those, and sometimes they end up in the cart as well. I wonder if you have a similar problem, we'll say, when it comes to Amazon. Maybe you experience the same thing when it comes to clothing or to that great bargain. Well, if it's 70% off and I only need one, maybe I can buy the next one and the next one. Maybe you have an infatuation with QVC. I don't know if you've ever bought some kids' Lego sets, and in the directions at the very end of that book, as you put together this amazing, maybe three-dimensional Lego set, is not just a good job, you did it, celebrate what you did. There's, oh, by the way, here's 30 other options in our collection to choose from. The list could go on and on and on about the ways that sometimes we fall victim to that. In fact, you and I live in a culture that does everything it can to index our hearts towards more. And it begs the question, is there a practice based in the life and the way of Jesus that will help to mitigate this indexing of our hearts towards more? And the answer is emphatically a yes, and it is this series on Sabbath that we have been in for the last few weeks. Last week, we approached this practice of Sabbath as a rhythm of rest, a rhythm of replenishment and help. A rhythm of rest that's really embedded in the fabric of creation, where God worked for 6 days and then he rested on the Sabbath. God works, so we work. God rests, so God rests. Now, this idea of rest and of Sabbath, it stands opposed to the cultural rhythm of work more so that we can buy more and then repeat this cycle, like the endless list of suggested items or suggested books, or now that you have this, let me show you 400 other things that you might need. So if last week was about Sabbath as rhythm, this week is about Sabbath as resistance. Say resistance with me where you are at home, but enjoy this idea. Sabbath as resistance. Now, at the beginning of July, maybe you guys have already watched it. Our family's become a little obsessive. Maybe it's just me, but our family is listening a lot to this soundtrack of Hamilton. Give us a digital high five or thumbs up if you've watched this now. Just world famous Broadway that took the world by storm 5 or 6 years ago called Hamilton. It's now available on Disney Plus. Free plug, send us some help, Disney. Let's see what happens. Hamilton is this incredible musical. It's not perfect. It's not perfectly historical. I can't vouch for everything that's in it. However, one of the reasons that this musical has so connected then and now to many of us is I believe that it has themes of a healthy resistance that made sense in the revolutionary time for those founders and Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr as they're trying to shape this new country, this new nation that will become what it is today. But one of the reasons that it is taken off again right now is because there are themes of healthy resistance that are happening right now in our culture. Resistance to extra, resistance to racism and injustice, resistance to ways of being that don't really settle well with our soul, settle well with this way of Jesus. And in fact, when we talk about the connection between Hamilton and Sabbath, yes, that's a connection I'm making for the moment, is that one of the things that both of them speak to is that it is a resistance to the way of more. It's the resistance to saying that we have and we are becoming enough, because that's what God says about us. Now, in asking this question and thinking about this idea of Sabbath as resistance, let's go back to the text from last week where Sabbath is first commanded in the book of Exodus. Let's review this for a second, and then we're going to see how Moses one more time gives us this command of Sabbath and changes the language oh so subtly. So check this out. This is in Exodus 20, the first time it is commanded. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy." I want to point out to you, remember that this command for the Sabbath, the first time is given. Notice that it is grounded in the story of creation, where work and rest exist in this symbiotic relationship modeled by God from the beginning. Work is good, but work without rest will grind your soul into the ground. Rest is good, but rest without work lacks meaning and it lacks purpose. This command is given to the nation of Israel, this chosen people. You'll hear them referred to as the Hebrews or the Israelites or the nation of Israel from this point forward in Scripture. It's given to them at Mount Sinai, where Moses goes up and he comes back down with the Ten Commandments, and they are fresh from their Egyptian escape where they were once slaves. They're challenged and they're given this new way of life for how to interact with each other and how to interact with God. And what do if you're familiar with their story? For a long time, they blunder it. And they are stuck. They are literally stuck wandering around the desert. They are stuck in their way of life. They instantly begin to turn their way on the God who rescued them and freed them. But we fast forward. In fact, we fast forward a few generations ahead. And picture Moses, who's been with these people for a long time, who was really like the community organizer that helps them to escape from their bondage and slavery in Egypt. And he is with them, and he's nearing his deathbed, and he knows his time is coming to an end. And he writes down, and he gives, as it's recorded in Deuteronomy, the second command for Sabbath. Essentially what he's doing is saying, hey, I gave these commands from God to your parents, to your grandparents, and they've messed it up. Now that you, the kids, the grandkids, and I'm about to leave, let's go back. Let me give you one more time what it is that God gave me to give you. Because they were still stuck. They were really, in this moment, he was giving the command from the edge of the Jordan River, just outside of Canaan, just outside where God really wanted them to be. And I want to read to you Moses' command in Deuteronomy and see if you can pick up on the subtle changes that he makes. Here's what he says. He says, observe the Sabbath. And then he goes on and he says, observe it, your kids, your servants, your animals, everything. And then he says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt. This is really, really key. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now, if you would have seen the first slide, you would have seen that essentially it is exactly the same command. But he wraps it up differently. Did you catch it? Did you catch the nuance, the change? In the first command, again, we've got to get this background. In the first command, it is rooted in the story of creation. It is grounded there. But in Deuteronomy, it's grounded in the story of redemption, the story of Exodus. In Exodus, it's about rhythm. In Deuteronomy, it's about resistance. In Exodus, it's an invitation to delight. In Deuteronomy, it's a warning to never to go back to Egypt again. In Exodus, it's an art form. It's about tapping in to this rhythm of creation, enjoying work and rest. And in Deuteronomy, it's a little more serious. And Moses is saying it's a protest against Egypt's oppression of more. It's a protest. Now, it begs this question. Now, the logical question is, here's a group of people that were in slavery. They were freed, and then several years later, their kids have to be warned not to go back. So why in the world would Moses need to warn ex-slaves not to go back towards slavery? It's because Israel is prone to the same thing that we are prone to. Amnesia, spiritual amnesia. We all are. It's easy to forget the past. And so in this way, he is urging the people not just to resist the oppression of Egypt, but to let Sabbath serve as a memorial to where they've come from. In Exodus, in this first command, Sabbath points back to creation. But in this second command, it looks back to Egypt. And Egypt is somewhere you never want to go back to. You never want to go back there. Well, why? Why? That's a cool statement. Let's track this a little bit more, and we'll bring it all the way up into the present. In Egypt, remember, the Israelites, the Hebrews, they were slaves. And slaves don't get a Sabbath. They work. They keep working. They work every day until they die. They are viewed as less than human. They are viewed as a commodity to buy and to sell. They are viewed as a commodity from which they will buy and sell. And their only value as humans, in their humanness, is what they produce. And they're led by this king who's viewed as a god, this guy named Pharaoh, and he is relentless. You think Karen's bad, all right? This is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is terrible. It's like all the Karens combined into one package and then given the power over all humanity, all right? Pharaoh is ruthless, relentless, cruel, mean, nasty, never wears their mask where they're supposed to, just terrible. And no matter how much you produce in Pharaoh's minds, it's never enough. But it wasn't just Pharaoh. It was Egypt as a whole. It was the socioeconomic system of Egypt. It was the ruler and it was the empire. And in this empire, under this guy named Pharaoh, what was Israel's job? As slaves, their job was to make bricks. Make bricks. That was it. Thousands of people, day in, day out, every day, all work, no rest. Life is about what you produce. If you can't produce, you're out. But it wasn't just to make bricks. It was to make bricks to build supply cities for the nation of Egypt. Now, this is a crazy thought. You think that maybe this wouldn't exist in the ancient world, but these supply cities were entire cities for Pharaoh and his rich friends to store their extra stuff. It's the ancient equivalent of cities built as storage units, essentially. So the slave's purpose in life was not to make bricks to build things that would be helpful for humanity. Not things to build aqueducts so that more people could have water, to build housing for the vulnerable and the poor. They weren't doing any of that. They were literally enslaved by someone else's desire for more. Simply put, for Pharaoh and for Egypt, there was never enough. Never enough. It was an economic system built on the back of slavery. And to get the lavish lifestyle of Pharaoh and of Egypt, then and now, present now, to get that, you have to stand on the backs of cheap labor, which is a nice way of saying slavery. And they work while you rest. This is what the Exodus story is about. This is why Moses in his second command is saying, listen, your parents were rescued from slavery. Don't blend in. Don't become so like your host culture that you go back to becoming a slave to the sense of more. by you yourselves getting so much of a lifestyle and lavishness and richness and resources that you in turn become the slave driver. Moses is warning them, and he's grounding this command of Sabbath in the story of Exodus, because the story of Exodus is a paradigm for them as it is for you of what salvation is all about. That salvation is about your freedom. Salvation is about your freedom. And in this case, it is particularly about salvation from the slavery, from the yoke, from the bondage of being stuck under a person and in a system that is all about more. And so the command to Israel is to remember at least three things. Remember, number one, that you have been set free. You are not slaves anymore. You are not in Egypt anymore. You are under a new king and a new kingdom. There's no quota, no supply cities. You are for now and forever free. Second thing is this, that remember that you are not the slave drivers, and make sure that you never become one. Hence the command to treat your kids, your servants, your animals, everyone with equality to your experience of Sabbath. Now, in that you may be saying, well, okay, but he's talking about servants. And we can talk about that. But really what you want to see is that is a command to a specific group of people in a way of life that is yet to put those things behind itself and say, hey, you were once the servant, you were once the slave. Elevate them to the same level that you are. Anyone that you see is vulnerable, poor, oppressed, elevate them to your level. It was social justice millennia ahead of its time. It was Sabbath for everyone. Here's the third thing. Remember that you are the image bearers of God. As you look back and you say, we will not be Egypt anymore. We will not participate in this empire of more. Know that you are an image bearer of God. And you are not what you do. You are not what you produce. And in many ways, for this group of people we'll call the Israelites, this nation of Israel, Sabbath served as a weekly reminder of their identity. It was also a reminder to the outside world that something is different about them. They have been rescued from something. They have been rescued from a way of injustice that at one point they were the victim of, but they were creeping towards being active participants in. Does any of this sound familiar? Does it sound a little bit like our world today? Does it sound a little bit like us and our Amazon suggested list that goes on and on and on? Does it sound anything like our constant desire to achieve and to accumulate more and to actively be participants of a global system, of an American system, that if we were to take some honest stock, looks more like Pharaoh and Egypt than the way of Jesus? Today, you and I need this practice because very much so, Pharaoh and the way of Egypt are still alive and well. It's alive in us, it's alive in me, and it's alive in you, and it's alive in the good old US of A. And like it or not, the global economic system of which we benefit and flourish in and have beautiful birthday parties for our kids in, this global economic system of which America is the engine, for now it is set up very similar to Egypt's. If you have $1 in your wallet, your purse, I know many of us don't because all we do is debit cards and online shopping these days. But if you were to take out a $1 bill, you would see a picture of an unfinished pyramid. And on this pyramid are 13 layers that represented at that time the 13 colonies. And then at the top is a gap between the kind of the capstone of like the Lord of the Rings all-seeing eye. And there's all kinds of speculation about what that really means. Is it based in God's eye of whom we trust and he looks over us, or is it some part of the Freemasons? Who knows? Or maybe it's Tolkien showing up with Lord of the Rings and Bilbo showing up to put this eye on. I don't know. Lord of the Rings references, if you don't know what they are, check it out. But here it is. This picture of the pyramid was meant to convey that our nation is an unfinished work. And on the surface, that's absolutely true. And that can be a great reminder of that. We should constantly be seeking to partner with God to improve our lot and others for all of human flourishing. That's really what work is. Cultivating Earth's resources and our passions and our minds and our relationships to improve the condition of life for all of humanity in partnership with God. But in all reality, part of what it symbolizes is that not is it just unfinished work, but we have a strong appetite for more wealth, for more power, for more accumulation. Think Black Friday. Think 0% financing. Think buy two, get one free. Think about the need to have the next generation iPhone every time it comes out, regardless of how high that price gets and how and whom and by whom it is made. Just like Egypt, sadly, we live in an empire built, I'm going to say it flat out, on the oppression of the poor. Slavery exists today. There is more people stuck in slavery and human trafficking in our world today than during the entire transatlantic slave trade of a couple hundred years ago. The reality is that we just moved it overseas. We put it out of our sight. We put it out of our mind. And that, if we're being honest, most of what is in our closet and in our homes and purchased from Amazon is connected indirectly to that. It is. We have to be honest about that. In fact, I would say that there is a little bit of Pharaoh in all of us. It's in our endless desire for more. And with our endless desire comes restlessness. Now, hear me, I am not anti-American. I have no problem with saying I'm a capitalist, I'm not a Marxist, but seriously, guys, it's getting ridiculous. It's getting way out of balance. It's bad out there. I remember a couple years ago, I took a team of our seniors from the school for a mission trip to New York City, and we would always stay across the Hudson in a Motel 8 in New Jersey, close to Hoboken. We'd take the Lincoln Tunnel every night, early morning, and we'd have to get on this shuttle. And we were dependent on that shuttle going from 42nd Street, just kind of the main bus terminal there. I'm losing the name of what it was, but to get there and then get across to our hotel. And you would imagine that over the course of the week being there, using that transportation every day, I began every time to develop some sort of conversation with the driver. And every year that we did our trip that way, it would be a new driver. That driver would almost always be a first-generation immigrant who would come to America to seek a better way of life for their kids, for their grandkids, and their life was wrapped up in spending 12, 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week on this shuttle, driving back and forth for wages that would be hard to raise a family on in West Virginia, let alone the cost of what it meant to live in New York City. And that always didn't sit super well with me. Here I am, leading a group of kids who are spending money to come to New York City to do missions work in partnership with local people, and we did our best to do it the way that it should be done biblically. And here we are, being propped up in our good work by someone who's being forced, or the forces of the empire, the economy, their way of life, their lot, was being forced essentially to work 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in many ways, that's noble. And that's amazing that they would come and they would sacrifice to give a better life for their kids and their grandkids. And that is a beautiful aspect of this American dream. But in other ways, it makes me wonder if there was a way that you and I, and the little bit of Pharaoh and this empire of Egypt that is in us and benefits us, if we could think and act and live slightly differently, that would create a better way of life for someone like that shuttle bus driver. There's a dark underbelly to what you and I and what many of you watching enjoy. After all, Egypt isn't bad if you're Egyptian, right? But Egypt never really goes away. It never really goes away for Israel. It was present later in their exile in Babylon, the book of Daniel. It's present later throughout the Roman Empire during the time of Jesus. And these examples really serve as the archetypes of the way the world is set up even now on this side of eternity. And here's my point, that our cultural moment exists within a global economic system of more that is built on the backs of injustice. And it's worse than ever. It's a massive blind spot for many of us. And it's not just economics. Egypt presents itself today as the empire of politics, where politics is no longer two sides that have similar goals and ideals, and they're going to work together, just different methods to reach the same goal. It's a religion in of itself. It is a battle of good versus evil. And certainly there are aspects of good and evil at work in politics, but we've taken it to such a degree that we've made it a religion in and of itself. Maybe it's present in the gods of nationalism. Maybe it's present in the gods of the internet and the interconnectedness and the way that we interact with the rest of the world. Now, again, please hear me. This is not some sort of anti-U.S. rant. I'm deeply grateful to live here, deeply grateful to flourish here. But I won't. And when I try to mirror that, to make sense of that based on the way of Jesus, I can't internally do it blindly. Abraham Herschel really nailed it when he said this. He said that there is happiness in the love of labor, but there is misery in the love of gain. Happiness in the love of labor. You and I were created to work. We have a God who works. We have a God who rests. We were created to do both. We flourish as we work. We find meaning and purpose as we work. And there are good byproducts of our work. There are good economic byproducts of our work. But when our heart for work transitions to a heart for gain, our lives become miserable. In fact, we work more than ever before. We have more than ever before, and we're still unhappy. It's Egypt all over again. And Moses warned the Israelites, don't go back. Don't go back. And maybe Moses, thousands of years prior to us in this cultural moment, maybe this Old Testament, some of you think maybe completely outdated idea, can speak directly to where we live, where we work, and where we play. And so now that maybe my economic rant is over for a second, what does any of this have to do with Sabbath? Just like Israel, we forget that Pharaoh is dead, that there are no more slave drivers, there's no more quota. You are free. You don't have to work 7 days a week. Your value is no longer tied to what you accomplish. Your goal of your work is not simply to make more money, to buy more stuff. It is to partner with God for all of human flourishing. Sabbath is an act of resistance to the oppression of more. And a culture of workaholism and consumerism, you need to hear this again and again, and I will be here to remind you of this for the years to come, and it may come at a loss for some of you, but I will serve to remind you of this, that there is more to life than accomplishment and accumulation. And Sabbath is a way to break free from the addictive pattern of accomplish more, accumulate more, and repeat. It's an act of defiance and rebellion and goodness against the endless, restless grind of workaholism and consumerism. Let me say it this way. Sabbath is a way to say enough. Enough. Enough work. Work is a good thing, but it's not the thing. Enough stuff. And for most of us, let's be honest, you don't need any more than what you already have. I don't need more than what I already have. I need to continue to pay the bills so we have clean water and the ability to heat and cool our home, which also isn't 100% a need. But I need to have that, and I need to have the ability to take care and clothe and feed my family. Beyond that, many of what I have is just luxury. It's Pharaoh living in my house. Many of you are stuck in the loop of the more you get, the more you want. The more you realize that Amazon has figured you out, and it gives you suggested emails, suggested purchases, suggested readings, and the list goes on, you'll find that, guess what? It's never enough. Sabbath is a way to draw a line in the sand and say, enough. Can you imagine, think with me for a second, just dream for a second. Can you imagine what would happen for the most vulnerable and for the poor, for the shuttle bus driver sitting in the basement of the New York Transit Center 16 hours a day? Can you imagine what would happen for them if our economy stopped one day a week? Can you imagine the sort of margin and rest and time that would recuperate? The time with the family that they are attempting to make a better life for? Can you imagine what would happen for you if you could get to a place of such health that not as a duty-bound rule or a law to follow, you simply said, at least one day a week, I'm going to live into the fact that I am enough and I have enough. And that we would just stop. That we would live into this idea of Shabbat, Sabbath, to stop. Not just to stop working, but to stop interacting with the worker in such a way that it forces the vulnerable and the other people to work so that you can enjoy your rest. I think that's more the way of Pharaoh than the way of Jesus. Sabbath reminds you that you are free. You do not have to work more. You do not have to buy more. You do not have to sell more. You do not have to move up in the company. You do not have to earn your father's love. You do not have anything to prove. You do not have to get a perfect score. You do not need another stamp in your passport. You do not need another bay in your garage. You do not need to look younger or more beautiful. You do not need to have your kids in ballet or soccer all year long. You do not need to make everybody happy. You do not need to get everything you want. You are free. Sabbath is an act of resistance and an act of alignment with God. It says, I am enough. I have enough. With you, God, I will resist the patterns of Pharaoh that are outside the patterns of Jesus, that put more of a pressure and a burden on the vulnerable, the oppressed, the poor in an economic sense, and does damage to my soul. So then what in the world and for the world and for myself do I do? We can't stop the global economy. I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing that we just pack up, move to some reclusive cornfield, set up some cabins, and live some alternative life. That's not what I'm saying. We exist in a host culture that has many, many benefits, but we must reframe how we exist in this host culture because we are ambassadors. We are people of God's kingdom first. And God calls us to live, to work, to play, to rest, and to be on mission as kingdom people first. And then the rest is for the benefit of all human flourishing around us. I can't stop the global economy. A migrant worker is going to live in poverty in China, whether or not I buy my iPhone or not. I can't avoid this empire completely. I wrote this message on an Apple computer. I have an Apple phone sitting on this table, and very, very likely those two items were assembled by the poorest of the poor in some worker factory in China or somewhere else in Asia in which they were subjected to incredibly difficult work conditions, low wages, or even worse. They were there as a result of some sort of trafficking or entrapment. All that is true. How do we reconcile that? How do we make sense of this from a pattern in the way of Jesus? Here's what I want you to do. And it's the same thing that Moses told the Israelites to do when they were under a system and people who were bent on building their lives on the injustice of someone else. I want you to stop and take time with God to enjoy what you already have and receive what more promises but never delivers, and that is contentment. Contentment. What if we practice gratitude in such a way that the way of Jesus, through the practice of Sabbath, through the practice of thankfulness and gratitude, inspired in us that at least one day a week, we could participate in the benefit of other people, the help of the most vulnerable, the poor, the struggling, the backs of people that in so many ways are working hard nobly to make better ends for their families, and that is good. There is great freedom in that. There is great opportunity in that, and that is a beautiful aspect of the host culture to which we belong. But if we take it too far, again, not anti-capitalist, not anti our economy, if we take it too far, we are living more so into the host culture than the way of Jesus. What if we were to stop, practice contentment, where in 1 Timothy it says godliness, which is a nice way of saying the way of Jesus is great. Godliness with contentment is great gain. What better version of more exists? It exists the way of Jesus with contentment. More never ends. More never ended for Pharaoh and for Egypt. It's alive and well today. It will never end for you. But there can be a line in the sand that draws on gratitude, it draws from the well of life, the ordinary life, true restfulness that helps us resist Pharaoh, resist Egypt, and live into this pattern of Jesus. You will be the most restful when ordinary life is enough, when you have freedom from the tyranny of more, freedom from Egypt. And that's what God brings. That's what the way of Jesus promises and delivers. Let's go back to Moses' final words on this subject. He says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. This is a difficult subject, and I imagine it may have pressed some buttons for you. I would love to this be a beginning point of conversation, but the simple fact remains that the same heart, the same why behind Moses' telling a group of people who just escaped slavery not to go back there exists today, and exists particularly in an economic form. That Jesus sets us free, and you can have contentment and gratitude as you practice Sabbath and you experience that the promise of more, the promise of the algorithm and the advertising and the happiness that will come with accumulation and accomplish actually comes when you settle yourselves in who you are and who you are becoming in Jesus. That's the good news of what Jesus' invitation is to you and I. It's not just a forgiveness thing. It's not just an eternity thing, and those are amazing, amazing things. It is an idea for the here and now that you can enjoy life and that you can live inside a host culture with goodness, with benefit for everyone, in partnership with God, that is for your flourishing and humanity's flourishing, that it reteaches you how to be human, how to work, how to play, how to rest, how to live, and how to lead your family and yourself in a way that escapes you and takes you to places of freedom, true freedom, inner freedom. That's what God has for us. That's his invitation. You want to go along for the journey? I sure do. Let's do it together, and let's pray. God, thank you that you provide a way in the midst of utter chaos, in the midst of utter uncertainty, in the midst of incredible economic disparity that has some benefit, some not so great benefits for people. I pray in the complexity of the world in which we live and the way that we interact with our host culture, with the way that we interact with the empire of economics and politics and all those other aspects that come vying for our attention, for our pocketbooks, for our time. I pray that we will run it through the matrix, the filter of your Son, Jesus, and that we will find great contentment in who we are and what we have as we align our souls through this practice of Sabbath to become more like you. That's all we can ask. I pray that you'll release the burden, the compassion fatigue of those things that we can't control. I pray that you will help us to take into account, though, those things that are within our reach, to impact and to influence and to love and to have perspective of. We love you so much, and we thank you for your goodness to us. In your name we pray. And everybody said, amen and amen. Let's do this together, guys. We love you. We're praying for you, and we will see you soon.